Super duper. Right, it's Tuesday, so you know what that means. Hello and welcome to Marketing Meetup webinar number 8. Today we've got the absolute pleasure of welcoming Emma Honeybone to speak with us. Emma is the head of relationship marketing at Engine Group, a global agency which, if LinkedIn is to be believed, is comprised of some 1,400 incredible people working with the likes of Coca-Cola, Under Armour, Sky, Domino's, the RAF, Unilever, and so many more. And you can correct me on that 1,400 figure if I'm wrong a little bit later. Emma herself has been on an incredible journey through marketing over the past number of years, starting at BT. If you go on my LinkedIn, there's just like a huge array of marketing roles in a whole range of companies. That's actually not something I knew about her up until today. I sort of took her at face value with how amazing she is, but you go back in time and then you get context for how amazing she is even more. Today, she's responsible for all the fun stuff at Engine, specifically engagement with clients throughout the whole Engine group, which no doubt would have been really, really interesting in the past 9 weeks, to say the least. This is actually the second time we've had Emma speak with the Marketing Meetup, she's already spoken in London. On a personal level for me, the thing that really impressed me is that she walked into the room, just absolutely lit it up, but also did so with just like no ego whatsoever. Just a really, really wonderful, humble person. In fact, at one point, I caught her standing at the door, welcoming people in and ticking their names off, which I can only say is once an event organizer, always an event organizer. But over this short time, I hope Emma won't mind me saying this, but I've come to think of her as a bit of a friend, which is either a signal of her being as personable as she is, or her just being really, really good at her job. Probably a mix of the two. The reason why today's session is relevant, so we're going to be looking at events, is that we've seen a monumental shift in everything in the entire world right now. And I've seen this myself. I've had to cancel 140 events for this year, which was a scary thing. But the gut feeling on that is that it should change everything. But when you actually start to analyze it, both Emma and I share an opinion that in fact much has stayed the same when it comes to putting on a great event. The session will look at both what's changed and what stayed the same before answering any questions. And I expect during this time, we'll probably also have a bit of an opportunity to get into the nitty-gritty of events and delivery online. So basically, if you hover your mouse over the Zoom window, you'll be able to see a Q&A option. Please do get your questions in, like if it's more detailed on like how to work the Zoom platform, for example, or anything like that. Just let us know because we can answer those. The way this session is going to work is that we're going to have a presentation first and then questions and answers afterwards. Before we get going in earnest and I hand over to Emma, I just want to say a huge, I feel like I can say huge a lot, but thank you to all the sponsors. They've been freaking unbelievable since this all began. You know, it would have been very easy for them to stand back and say, look, we can't do anything, but they've said that they would stand by our side. So you've already had an email this morning with them listed. I made the request then, but I'm going to reiterate it now. There's a name at the end of each of the sponsors. It says, say thanks to Marcus, say thanks to Andy, etc. If you could take 5 minutes from your day, if you get value from this session, just to thank those people, that will make the hugest difference to, you know, just keeping the marketing meetup on the road and making them feel as appreciated as possible. I won't go into depth here, but thank you to Pitch, Content Cow, Fiverr, Redgate, Cambridge Marketing College, Lido, Brand, Further, Third Light, Bravo, and Human. As an aside, while you can also thank them, also do engage in their products and services, because likewise, they're amazing. So with all that said, I've done my introduction bit. You are already besotted by the wonderful person that is Emma, who we have the pleasure of speaking to for a short time. So Emma, over to you.
Right, this should be super smooth, shouldn't it? But you can guarantee that as I share my screen, it ends up being really clunky. But
No, you're good. You got it.
Good. Okay, cool. Hello, everybody. Oh, Joe, thank you for that intro. I'm slightly embarrassed, as you know would be. That's very kind. I really love being part of this community, and actually, I'm so happy to come back and talk again because I think I only spoke in February this year at the Meetup in London,
Yep.
and look at how much has changed in that time. It feels like last year. It doesn't feel like something that was earlier this year. Just so everybody knows me, I have got so many notes for my presentation because I don't want to miss anything. So if you hear rustling paper, it's me making sure I don't get overexcited and miss some of the key points that I want to share with you today. But as Joe said, I'm head of relationship marketing at Engine Group. Worldwide, we do have that number of employees. In the UK, we have about 800 people who are based primarily out of London and Manchester, and we do work with some absolutely incredible brands, which makes the job an absolute joy. But also we work with incredible people within those brands, and that's what makes my role so exciting. I think my job title's a bit wanky, if I'm honest, head of relationship marketing. It just sounds so vague. Someone described it as making clients feel special, which again is a bit vague, but it's probably true because the whole point of my job, which isn't just events, it's about how can we engage with clients in an interesting way, is to make them feel that we understand what they do. So we only present them with opportunities to engage with Engine around topics that are of relevance to them. So today I just wanted to share a little bit of background about me and how I got into this role, and then to look at how I think the event world, the event landscape has changed in 8 weeks, which is all it is, but it's completely turned on its head. So I was a BT graduate. I then left when I had a child, and I set up a family magazine, which I ran for 2 years because I thought having a young baby wouldn't be enough to fill my time. When I got into the swing of working with the child, I then went freelance, where I started to work with Engine as a freelancer. And then 4 years ago, I became a permie at Engine, which has been, I have to say, 4 of the best years that I've had in my job. And then a year and a half ago, I became head of relationship marketing, which is running the program that I run for the whole group. So let me just, I have to remember to click on that little arrow. Or, as Joe said, today I'm going to talk about how to nail events, which is what it said on LinkedIn.
I kind of feel like I've imposed that upon you a little bit.
I think we do talk about how to nail events, so I don't think that's it's an unfair description, but God, I hope we do, otherwise you're going to be really, really cross with us. So firstly, where did it all begin for me? When I started in BT, I didn't know anything about events other than the theory that I'd been taught at university. And my very first event was an event for government and corporate clients at the top of BT Tower. So really prestigious venue with super high profile speakers. We had members of parliament come in and talk. And then we had this guy called Bruce, who was our American director, 6 foot plus tall, really imposing. I'd pulled the events together. I was really happy with it. Bruce did his presentation, sat down front row and fell asleep. And he fell asleep and snored more loudly than I've ever heard anybody snore before. And I hadn't even considered that that was going to be something that could happen in my events. I thought I'd done some decent risk assessments, but all I could think about was, how do I stop this man snoring? At the same time, worrying about what has to happen next in the event. Did I prepare for this? Did I prepare for that? So I had to sit next to him. I'm 5'2", I'm pretty tiny, and basically elbow him in the ribs to keep him awake. So it was quite a stressful event, really, even though for most of the people who were there, they probably didn't notice it quite as much as I did. But I came out of that thinking, I really need to be better prepared. I can't prepare for everything that's going to happen. You can't foresee every eventuality, but if you can have the things that are within your control totally nailed, to use Joe's expression, then when something unforeseen does crop up, you've got the headspace to deal with it, because you know that everything else is going to run to plan, because you know when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen. So I started pulling together processes, which I'm going to share some of them with you, that I've been using for a number of years now, and they seem to work. So much so that last year, oh, that's my That's my representation. That's not Bruce in the middle, by the way. This is the Tory party conference, which, depending on your leaning, you'll either like or dislike. So last year I had an event which was all around women's sport and how we were going to change the narrative. And that big red arrow at the top is highlighting an empty chair, because my keynote speaker, who left her house at 5 a.m. in the morning, didn't arrive. So we started the session without her. She was absolutely panicked on the train. She got off a train, she rented a car, she got back. It was planes, trains and automobiles for about 4 hours as this poor woman, Emma Honeybone, who led the England netball team to Commonwealth gold the year before, was desperately trying to get to London to come and share her experiences of what it's like to be a female sports person. Because I knew how the event was going to play out, I felt quite chilled about it. You know, it seemed like she was going to get there for a part of the event. The reality was, if she didn't, I could do nothing about it. I couldn't change it. You know, she wasn't there, so we just had to adapt around her. In the end, she arrived with, I think, 10 minutes to spare, and we gave her the spotlight for those 10 minutes. Initially, we wiped her down because she was so clammy from stressing to get to this venue and feeling she'd let us down. And then we just sat her down and said, "Look, you're late, but it's fine. You know, we've waited and we'll speak to you." And because the processes were in place, it kind of felt like, even though it wasn't something we wanted, it was something that we could manage. So 2 weeks ago, this is today, I was running a training session in my company on how to use our new CRM system. CRM is a really integral part of any events manager's role. And I realized my Tesco delivery was going to come in the middle of the session, because I booked it 3 weeks before. And anyone who has booked a food delivery knows you do not give up a food delivery in these current times. So I just left a note on the mat to say, "Can you just leave my shopping? I've left the front door open. I can see you from here. And I'll take any substitutions. I don't care. I need the food, and I also need to run this training session." Again, because I was prepared and I understood what I was doing. I didn't feel particularly stressed about it, but it was something that was slightly unforeseen. And then this morning, I ran an event which was all around brand resilience, and we had a marketing director of Pinterest and the chief customer officer for Kazoo on the panel. And the person who was chairing the session for me realized that he had a DPD parcel that was going to be delivered in the middle of the session, and he was the chair. So he'd submitted via the app, "Can you send it to this location instead, and I'll pick it up from a neighbor at a later point." But his delivery man's quite chatty and likes him. So I said to him, "Look, you're going to have to put a note on your doorstep as well." He didn't look like this. I just like Lego figures. Joe knows this. We're really into Lego in Engine. In fact, we run a big project for Lego. So we have huge Lego figures all around the office. They're now probably ridiculously dusty because nobody's been there for 9 weeks. But the reason I'm sharing this is, one of the things that I think I'm becoming more mindful of is, this used to be exceptional. So when this little kid, this awesome kid, walked in behind her dad, who was on BBC News, the world talked about it for days, and it became a meme. We expect this now. I mean, Joe's got his dog under the desk at the moment. So at some point, you know, the dog could make an appearance. I have a cat, but I don't think she's around. And I do have a child, but she's 15 and probably in bed. So, you know, I'm not likely to be disturbed. But when this happened, you know, there was much discussion about, "Oh my goodness, you know, this is what it's like working from home." Well, now we're all subject to these interruptions. And I think that started for me to sort of crystallize how things have changed in terms of how we view what used to be work impacting on life, and we accepted that that was okay. Work was going to impact on life. Now life impacts on work, and we're becoming much more forgiving of that. We're recognizing that our colleagues do actually exist outside of the bubble of our businesses, and that can only be a good thing as far as I'm concerned. It's really nice to feel the humanity of people. So in terms of planning, I thought I'd share with you how I plan events, but in the context of today, and how things are working now that we're in this COVID-19 world, and how that doesn't have to impact on being successful. So this is my view of pre and post COVID. basically they're the same, you know. We still have to set objectives when we want to pull an event together. We still have to determine if we have a budget. One of the things I'll come on to later is that actually cost is reduced in this world. So in many ways, it does make it easier to get it signed off by your organization. We still have to think about how we're going to get it out to the audience and make sure that we get people to come along. We have to manage it in the same way, timelines, checklists. I'm a big fan of Excel spreadsheets, and I have very rigorous sheets that show me how things are going to play out for that event on a day by day, sometimes minute by minute basis, which again, I'll share with you. We need to know who's responsible for what. And after every event, we need to do some evaluation. What worked, what didn't work, you know, where do we continue, where do we make changes? But also lots has changed in the event world. And Joe and I have talked about this a couple of times recently. Pace. I mean, I can't imagine 3 months ago being asked to run an event on brand resilience and deliver it a week later, which is what happened for the event this morning. You know, we think this is a really good topic. We want to deliver it on Tuesday morning. If we'd had that conversation around a face-to-face event, it wouldn't be feasible. We wouldn't be able to get people there. But the pace, because we're remote, because we're digital, has completely transformed how we're interacting in the event world. The audience, the reason this audience box is bigger is because one of the brilliant things about where we are today is that we can reach more people in this new world. Before, we were limited on the capacity of a venue. So your budget would determine what size venue you could have versus what, you know, standard of venue, whether you're going to go swanky and small or large and a little bit more simple. Now we can invite anybody. You know, we had people from Europe on our call this morning. We had someone who woke up and dialed in from the States, which I thought was bonkers because we record the webinar. She could have watched it afterwards, but she wanted to feel like she was part of the conversation. And for me, I think that's brilliant, being able to say, we can go broader geographically, but also one of the things that's frustrated me in the past is this focus on senior level attendees. So let's always invite the senior person because they're the decision maker, they're the budget holder. It's not always true. There's a team of people that will deliver a project within an organization. And because of this new world that we're operating in around events, we can invite multiple people much more easily from a single organization. And we don't have to rely on contacting that C-suite or director level person who, let's face it, really doesn't have the time anyway to come to everything that they're invited to. Channel, look, digital channels, it's podcasts or webinars at the moment. So, you know, get on board and enjoy it. It makes it pretty straightforward. The main decision is usually what platform am I going to use. Tolerance I touched on earlier with this idea of life impacting on work. But tolerance is also, when we ran webinars before COVID, people were super critical. You know, it's very one-dimensional. It's not particularly engaging. If your tech wasn't high spec enough and the audio dropped out, or your video wasn't of a high definition, people would really criticize. Now you can have someone talking. I'm hoping mine isn't doing it. They can clip, you know, their video can freeze, and people wait because they're thinking, do you know what? They're at home. They might have kids who are using Wi-Fi. They might live remotely where their Wi-Fi speed is quite slow. We've got a tolerance that we didn't have before, and I think that's a hugely positive step when you work in the job that we do. Cost I also touched on. It's lower because, you know, what we're delivering is typically we need to pay for the platform. And we might do something around some post edit of content, and we might decide to pay to promote on LinkedIn. But other than that, it's pretty low cost. And then output, this has been super exciting for me, is everything's recorded. So before, where if I ran an event, I would need to think, I'm going to get a film crew in, I need to get really good AV, you know, I need to get a stage and all of those sorts of things. But the output is immediately recorded. I've got video that I can share. I have an audio, so I can create a podcast out of it. Joe and I were just talking about the fact that you get transcripts off the back of your recording, so that helps you do write-ups. That in itself is, you know, it's transformed how quickly we can get the content out after a session, but it also means we can share with a much broader audience because we're not relying on, you know, a budget of another 5 or 6K to be able to record and create an asset off the back of an event. If you want me to sort of say anything else, Joe's got the chat, so he can always jump in if I'm going too slow or too fast. So do feedback. I want to make sure this is relevant to you. I don't want you to be sitting there bored. So some examples, I thought would be useful just to share some examples of what I've done over the past 8 weeks. Sofa Sessions is a series of webinars that I'm running with our influencer marketing team. Influencer marketing is totally new to me. I'm of an age where I just don't really get it. So Gemma does, she's awesome. So we've been running these sofa sessions where we bring in a bunch of influencers and a brand, and we talk about a particular issue. And we run those every 3 weeks. Now, the thing that I like about running these is that it's allowed me to reflect on the fact that although we're having to turn these around really quickly, although the subject matter might not be something I'm particularly comfortable with, the process that sits underneath it is exactly the same. I mean, it literally, bar a couple of things, has not changed. I'm not doing anything in a different way apart from 2 small aspects. So I start with a proposal. Every event has a proposal, and this is how I get sign off internally to go ahead. It's not always about budget. It's about making sure that when we go out and talk about things from an engine perspective, that we're on brand, that we understand what the market wants, that we're bringing in the right experts, that we're delivering to a really high quality. This is just keeping me pure in terms of what our business objectives are across the different divisions that we have within the company. So the proposal always has an event overview. What is it we're trying to achieve? What are we going to talk about? Sets out the objectives. Is it lead generation? Is it relationship building? Is it about building taking our pipeline and developing it through the channel? It talks about which attendees are going to come in. So who are our speakers and what do they bring to that conversation? It talks about who we want to target. So what function, has a running order. I mean, I can share, if Joe wants to, I can share some templates for this if people would like to use them in the future. I find I couldn't do my job without this. Talks about the logistics. Everyone's the same at the moment. Delivered via Zoom webinar, never changes.
It's so true. There's a lot of people saying yes, please, to the templates. By
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll pull together the template and send that out afterwards, because it's very handy just to have a guide, isn't it, that you start from rather than have to build it yourself. Sure. So logistics, yeah, always the same, Zoom webinar, but within that I include some briefing notes for speakers. So if you can, please have a network connection. If you have any sort of background noise, then use headset, because we're likely to pick up on it. And we always do a test. So I'm going to ask you to come in and make sure that we can hear you and talk to you about how the logistics are going to work. So how do you stop people from talking over each other when you're in a panel session? This panel, that picture that you can see, absolute nightmare. They just talked like they were in a bar having a glass of wine. And in the end, I just gave up and said, just go for it, it's fine. I was trying to mute them in between their topics, and they were just like, what's she doing? She keeps muting me. So again, you can plan everything and then people will go rogue, and you just have to be prepared to either accept it or make a decision. And then budget estimates is, as I outlined earlier, it's important to know what sort of costs you're going to incur. And I do keep a document history, because otherwise people don't know if they've got the latest version. So, really basic things, but actually they make your job so much easier. And the 2 things that I think have changed in lockdown is target attendees. As I mentioned, much broader. We can offer 500 spaces on a Zoom webinar. I was never going to run an event for 500 people in central London. And the logistics, which I outlined in terms of it's always Zoom. I did start out with, Joe asked me this when we were chatting. I started out with GoToWebinar as my platform, but actually we had Zoom within Engine. So we'd already implemented that technology before this happened. And then I discovered that there was a webinar functionality. Now, it's not as slick as GoToWebinar in terms of the interface. The user interface on GoToWebinar is beautiful. And when you run a webinar on GoToWebinar, when the webinar ends, all of your panelists can stay online and have a chat. When a Zoom webinar ends, everybody gets cut off. it's the most brutal ending to every. So you go and the panelists go. And the first time I did it, I thought, oh shit, where's everybody gone? And my panelists, you know, you could imagine them. They were all, in fact, it was a racing driver, Naomi Schiff. It was a cricketer, Georgia Elwys, and it was Claire Rafferty, who's Chelsea and England football player. I didn't realize this happened, and they just got cut off. So they were like, did I do that? Was that my mistake? You learn these things quite quickly, don't you, Joe?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
So this is my plan. And this is actually probably about 10 times the length of what you can see on the screen. But every single event that I do, I pull together one of these. Even if I'm doing it in a week's time, I pull together one of these. And it's a step-by-step guide to make sure we don't miss anything. And if I do this and I go through it every day, when something comes in that needs my attention, it's all about headspace. I'm not having to try and remember, what have I got to remember to do today? It also means anybody who's part of the extended team, there's lots of areas whited out on here because I didn't think it was fair to share my team members' names and phone numbers, which were included originally. So if you've got people who are working on the event with you, it's almost like their individual tick list of what they need to do and when they need to do it. So it's a step-by-step guide. And I mentioned earlier on about minute by minute. That's what a webinar looks like in my world.
This is insane.
I
It's
know.
amazing. It's so good.
Can you imagine living with me? What a nightmare. But, you know, I've done so many of these now that actually I know those steps. But it would be so easy for something to happen and me forget to hit record if I didn't have that. And if I don't hit record, I don't have the asset that I want. And I learned that from a guy called Matt Watkinson. This is years ago. He wrote a book called The 10 Principles Behind Great Customer Experiences, I think the book is called. And one of the things he talked about was pilots. So no matter how many flying hours a pilot has done, they will still go through the same checklist. And some of that is really basic stuff. But the reason they do it is to make sure that they don't become complacent or assume that they've already checked it because they're doing so many of these things on a repetitive basis. You can think, of course I've pressed record, and then get to the end and realize that you don't have any of the assets we talked about earlier to share with people who weren't there or people who just want to send it out to someone they work with. So minute by minute, anal as hell, but really gets me through my day. So when I've got my production schedule, I then move into an event book. And this is something I share with anybody who has a client. So it tells them everything they need to know about the event so that they can prep their client who's going to attend. Even if someone's not coming in to see us face to face, it's still an opportunity for somebody who manages a client to reach out and talk to that person. So, hi, you know, you're coming along to the brand resilience webinar tomorrow. I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. Just to remind you, we kick off at this time and be great to catch up with you afterwards. By having it all documented, I don't have 50 account team leaders contacting me and saying, what's happening? When's it happening? Who's going to do this? What's the follow-up afterwards? It's just a really clear way of telling the business how we're going to manage the event, what's going to happen, and then what the follow-up plan is afterwards. Jason Fox we had in last year, and he was amazing. He was so great. Everybody loved him. There was a lot of love for him in the room. That was a face-to-face one, which was, do you remember those? We used to meet in a room with lots of people.
The glory days.
Although actually, I think, again, Joe and I have talked, and there's some aspects of this life that I'm really loving. And then every single event has a follow-up and review, and I don't think this ever changes. One thing I did very quickly is, so Joe has this great video at the beginning of his webinars, which is allowing you all to join the conversation so we don't start it without anybody. One of the things I do with my clients, because of the type of people who are sitting on the call, is I run a poll. So I ask them a question that is either going to be of benefit to the speaker who's leading it, so it gives them some insights that they can shape some questions around, but it also just fills that time while people are logging in and make sure that we give people those few minutes they need to get on the system, to be ready, and also to calibrate, because you kind of need that little bit of time to get in the headspace of, okay, I'm starting, I'm going to listen now to what you're saying. But my follow-ups you know, it's what you would imagine. I review the process. Do the templates work? Is the approach working? Were the timings okay? Did we run over? Did we run under? Do we need to think about that? In my event plan, I actually have, so the minute by minute bit you saw in the production schedule, I have that in a script as well. So my lead presenter will have, here's where your intro goes. At this time, roughly, this is when you do introductions. At this time, roughly, it's your first set of questions. You want to be trying to do the poll about 10:35 because that then leads you into audience Q&A. And for a chair, that actually makes them feel really comfortable, again, that they're not going to, you know, lose track of time or let the event run away with them or miss an opportunity to share something important. And I just thought I'd share this. This is kind of what I've been doing for the events I've run over the past couple of weeks. So we've had, is that 7? Yeah, 7 webinars in the past 2 weeks. And I wanted to compare registration to attendance conversion rates. And actually they're pretty similar, which means there's not a huge amount. There's one there that's 42%, which we'll have a look at and see what we could have done differently. But by tracking it, we can just understand if the events that we're running continue to be on track, but also think about whether we need to make any changes in what we're doing. And I've also been looking at time and session to see if people are dropping out really early on. And actually, I think that's probably a pretty good reflection. Not everybody can commit an hour. So we do find people drop out after half an hour because they need to go do something else and they'll catch up on the rest of the recording. But 60 to 70% staying for the whole thing, I think that's good. I'm happy with that so far, but we'll continue to do that analysis on an event by event basis and make sure we stay on track. So coming to the end, it's really important that at the beginning, the headline said 90% process, 10% glamour. You've got to celebrate the 10% because actually that is the bit that gives you the buzz, it gives you the high, it's where you get, you know, all the joy of the work that you've put in. So before, this was running up to March, this is what my celebration looked like. Amazing speakers along the top, a theatre in Soho House where we had a film screening, Wolseley for breakfast, oh my god, the Dorchester for afternoon tea with a Brilliant Women Network. This is the celebration in the last 8 weeks. So quite similar, constantly looking at screens, but the presenters are no less impressive. You know, I mentioned Claire Rafferty and Naomi over here, and then we've got Louise Richardson, who's the director of marketing for Pinterest, and Darren Bentley, who's the CCO for Kazoo, and then this lady here, she runs all of the influencer programs for Sky. So we're getting the opportunity to meet some interesting people. It's just we're doing it from the comfort of our own home. So whistle-stop tour of what I do, and hopefully, thank you, Rock. That was useful. Joe knows I love The Rock.
Don't we all? It's impossible not to love The Rock. And
just one thing though. So on my CRM training, I actually enter my new contact is The Rock. It's Dwayne Johnson at Terramana Tequila, and that's the person I enter into the system to show people how to use it.
Does this mean he's just getting like absolutely slammed by your marketing automations? Like,
I don't think I've got his correct email address. I've tried, it doesn't work.
Can you imagine if you get a reply one day?
Amazing.
Just please unsubscribe me from this email address.
Exactly, Emma. Stop it now.
That was wicked. Thank you so much, Emma.
Shall I stop sharing my screen?
Yeah, I mean, as much as we'd like to stare at The Rock, then like, every time I see you speak, then I'm just reminded, A, how organized you are, and B, what a process I need to drive around things. We've had
the template.
Yeah. I need it. 100% need it. So we've already had a whole bunch of questions come in. There's a couple of things to say about this. The first is if you head into the Q&A feature, there's like 18 questions already. We've got about 25 minutes. So if people want to use the thumbs up feature to get the best questions to the top, or the questions you want answered, that will really help me, because there's about 400 different screens going on right now. The second thing is, like, if you've got any questions, now's the time to ask them, because we'll be answering them. So, wow, there's been a small explosion in thumbs up, which is great. So the first one actually comes from the mysterious anonymous attendee. So if you don't mind, we'll just go through one by one. So
Yeah, they're my favourite, those anonymous attendees. I was imagining them as a particular way.
well, it's probably the Rock. It's probably the Rock.
I'm sure it is. You know, he's always here, follows me everywhere.
Yeah. So the Rock asks, how do you stand out amongst the competition with webinars, especially during the current climate?
Yeah. So firstly, I don't think that should be your consideration to stand out. It should absolutely be, what do we want to talk about with our clients? How do we want to talk to them? If you have the right content with the right panel, and you send it to the people that it's of interest to, then they will engage. The other thing that I'm really, really passionate about is it's not about the 130 people in isolation who are on this webinar at the moment. There are a whole bunch of people who would like to be here and can't, who will still have access to this content. And one of the big benefits of webinars that we mentioned earlier is the fact that you have this asset that you can then share. So when you record it, one thing I would say is it's really nice to break it down into little bite-sized chunks of topics. And that way you can say, here's a little bit about us talking about, is purpose important in the brand conversation still? So I don't think it's about standing out from the competition if you've got the right content targeted at the right people with the right experts.
For sure.
That's the view.
No, absolutely. I guess it comes down to the sort of circle that you had around target audience. And even your point at the time was that you can have a broader amount of folks, then even if you have 10 people on a call and they're the right 10 people, it doesn't matter if you know, you don't need the hundreds. So.
I mean, I would add a layer to that. In that, one of the things you can do is make sure you really utilize the people who are involved. So when I run my influencer series, I make sure they share the webinar to their audience, and then we will get sign up through a different route. LinkedIn's brilliant in terms of being able to promote content. You know, you've seen how well Joe does it for the marketing meetup. He gets lots of engagement, lots of interaction. So there are things you can do to elevate it, but I don't think you should be starting at a position of thinking about competition, because it would just take you down a rabbit hole of what do they do versus what do we do, rather than what is it we stand for.
I love that. That's really great point. So thank you. So second question from Polly, not the Rock, unfortunately, but Polly is lovely. So what are the ways that you've kind of identified to make webinars more hands-on or engaging, especially if you're using a platform like YouTube Live, where viewers are unable to participate in polls like with Zoom?
Yeah, so I think sometimes you just have to accept the limitations of some platforms. And if you've got a poll where you really want to ask an opinion, do it before the webinar, include it within the invitation. You know, say up front, look, we're going to be doing this via YouTube Live, or you're going to be joining us via YouTube Live. So you're going to be really on very much a broadcast mode rather than a two-way engagement, but we still want your input. So I would think about different routes of engaging with people outside of the webinar itself, so they feel like they're able to contribute. It takes a little bit more organization, but it's not impossible to do that. The only bit is you then need to do a little bit of calibration of results if you want to share the results live in a session. But whenever I run a webinar, I have a team of people who are doing things like monitoring questions and analyzing things. If we run multiple polls, analyzing the results and bringing in some statistics to support that. So you can do it. It's just not as straightforward as doing it live in the webinar.
Yeah, I agree. And actually on that point, when we were chatting beforehand, you mentioned doing the poll is also a great way to sort of get, you know, information, almost like a, you know, like a survey that you'd send out and stuff like that. So
absolutely, yeah, we've asked questions on polls that have given us insights into where brands are going to spend money, for example, and we've been very upfront. You know, the question clearly says we want to know what your priorities are moving forwards. But on Zoom webinar, you get a report that tells you how everybody answered the poll question. Where would you get that? You know, if you were in a live venue where people voted, you might get people raising their hands, or you might, if you're lucky and you've got budget, have the ability for people to vote using a panel on their seat, but you don't know who said what. This to me is transformational in terms of how we're engaging with people and understanding what they need.
Absolutely. And also to sort of reinforce your point as well, I think that forgiveness, you know, you mentioned in your presentation, but I think people do, you know, so far as I'm aware, and the feedback that we've got, people are just like, yeah, it's a webinar, you know, that's what we expect, you know. So it's also reflective of the times.
Yeah, and the benefits are they're not having to travel to places. They're not having to leave their desk. You know, it's quite easy. They can do other things. One of the things I always say in my script for my chairs is, look, we know that life gets in the way. If you have to drop off and go and sort out the kids, or you get a DPD delivery or a Tesco food delivery, you'll get the recording. So people are just a bit more relaxed about it, which is just so lovely. It's much more engaging.
Absolutely. No, 100% agree. Yeah, absolutely. So you've already given us the stats on people who sign up versus attend events online. What's your best guess on how that compares to in person? Maybe
You
best
know,
guess is
no,
the wrong word.
No, I've got the stats. So our typical, I mean, we are running at 50 to 58% conversion for webinars. So this morning I had 117 people registered, 69 people turned up. If I run a face-to-face event, I can expect somewhere between 40 and 50% of people to drop out on the day. If it's raining, I can expect that to drop even lower. So if it's really bad weather, a tube line's gone down in London, and you know, there's a football match happening that evening, my attendance rates are going to go through the floor. So not dissimilar, but probably 50 to 60 is still about right. I'm not seeing it, you know, move that much.
No, and it's been very much the same with the events that we've been running.
Yeah, and the thing, again, I'll go back to is people do get obsessed with bums on seats, and they measure success by how many people are in the room or on the call, and that isn't the measure of success. The measure of success is how many people said, this looks really interesting, but I can't come. That's an engagement. I'd love to come, put me down as tentative, they don't show up. That's an engagement. I couldn't make it because this happened. That's an engagement. All of those are opportunities to speak to somebody. Okay, in the room it's slightly different because you have an experience with that person, but it doesn't mean that it, you know, it's any less successful unless you don't follow up.
Yeah,
that's
that
in your own head.
Yeah, no, 100%. That follow-up is so crucial.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree with that more. Folks, don't forget to keep doing those thumbs up if you see a good question and you want it up. Actually, on this point, rather than moving to the top one, I'll move to the second one because it's on the topic, which is, what would you do to improve attendance rate?
So that, to me, and it's the same for face-to-face events as it is for online events, is it's all about the comms in the run-up. So every time someone registers to attend an event, a calendar invite goes into their diary, a personal calendar invite. So we're not relying on them to click the add it to calendar. We're not relying on them to remember to come along. We make sure that in the run-up they get a reminder, you know, this event's going to take place in a week, or with the webinars, we're saying your event's taking place tomorrow, and then an hour before, which I know Joe does as well. We also will drop in snippets of what they're going to hear. So we'll get presenters or panelists or experts to share a little nuggets. You know, Mark Ritson's going to swear for an hour on and how he thinks that we're all screwed and that nobody's going to have any compassion left afterwards. Well, yeah, I'm going to rock up for that, no question. It's about teasing people with why it's still relevant to them, why it's still a good investment of their time. The other thing is, if you do that, you're more in control of people who drop out. So you're managing your numbers much more tightly, because people, if you send them a reminder, most people feel compelled to say, I'm really sorry, I can't come. If they can't, rather than if it's just in their diary, they go, it's not that important. But if Emma's sent them something and there's a real person attached to it, oh, well, I'll make sure I let, you know, Emma know. So those sorts of things, I think, are good for improving your attendance rates. No guarantees though, you know.
No, I think it's very easy to get quite demoralized when people don't show, but I think you've made a couple of really, really good points there. The first is, don't worry about the bums on seats necessarily, because you know you've also got the opportunity to engage, but then there is also a lot you can do, and you've nailed it with communications. That's like 100% the thing that makes a difference. And Zoom's functionality, where you can remind people a day and an hour before.
And I mean, God, it's hideous to look at, isn't it? Those are so grim. I mean, every time I type in the content, I just grimace at how ugly they are. But they're very effective. You know, hi, you've registered, confirmation. Here's a reminder. Here's a reminder. Thank you for coming.
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely. No, couldn't agree more. So we've got a question from Charlotte. Do you have any tips for good calls to actions after free webinars? And
Yeah, so interestingly, we don't do any events where we charge. All of our events are free. And the reason we do that is we see it as a value add to our clients. We want them to feel connected to us. If we have to start charging for events, then we're going to get a very different audience. We want people, and yes, there's always the argument around if people charge, if you charge, people are less likely to drop out because they've made a financial commitment. But I don't have that customer base, so it would feel unusual. Call to action for me is a number of things. So I would always segment my market by clients, prospects, and then other. So other could be people we don't work with and they're not really in a role at the moment, but we want to maintain a relationship. So I'll categorize them in a way that tells me a little bit about each group. And then we sit down as a team and we think, right, what is it we want to tell that group? Clients, we want to remind them why they're clients of Engine. So we make sure the content that we share with them adds value. We give them something they can take back into the business that they can share with their teams. Prospects, we sing our praises. We say, thank you for joining us. You might not know, we wrote the Martha Lane Fox report that resulted in the creation of gov.uk. We were the people behind Robert De Niro's bagel advert. Like it or love it, it was Robert De Niro, people. You know, this is really good stuff. So we would remind that group, we would tell that group why they should think about working with us. And then the other, especially those people where they're in between jobs, we just make them feel loved. You know, we know they're going to land somewhere else. We know they're going to end up in a job where if they remember us with fondness and that we add, you know, real context to their job, then they'll come back to Engine. So the call to action for us is always about what we can give to the customer that will help us to have a conversation. We very rarely sell in follow-up. It's very rare for us to pitch anything. We just make them feel like we should speak to you. You're super smart and you're doing really good things.
That's awesome.
Kind of what we do.
That's so cool. Good on you. You know, I mean, this is someone doing marketing right, folks. Okay, so The Rock has once again pitched in with another anonymous question. So he says, is it too late to start running a webinar series? With so many companies now doing them, has it become an overcrowded market? Will we be seen as late to the party or jumping on the bandwagon?
No, I don't think so at all. And if anything, you know, I'd be thinking now about the future. So what do we think the future is going to look like for our organisation? We're going to live in a hybrid model for a period of time. There are going to be some people who go back to the office and there are going to be some people who stay at home. Webinars have a really important part to play, particularly in that hybrid stage, because you're not going to be able to say, well, let's start running all of our events in London again, or Manchester, or Newcastle, or Birmingham, or Bristol, or wherever it is that you're located, because you're going to miss a big section of your audience who will not feel comfortable getting on the train to go into the office, who may not have childcare sorted because their school isn't going to reopen. So I'd be thinking, what is it we want to communicate to our audience? And don't think about it as a webinar series. That's just your channel to market. And if you've got interesting content that targets people in a way that delivers some value, informs them something new, or gives them something that enables them to go back into their business. One of the things I love doing is making people who come to our events feel like heroes. So they learn something new that they can take into their business and say, we can do this and we're going to transform the way they work. So that's what I'd be thinking about. You're not late to the party and you're definitely not jumping on the bandwagon. This is it, people. We need to do more of this moving forwards.
100%. So true. So true. Folks, we've got 10 minutes left. So we're going to be in like quick fire round sort of territory here. So like hammer those thumbs up if you want them, because that's the way I'm going to be picking the questions.
All right.
Before we do that brutal finish.
Yeah. Bye.
Yeah. That's it. So we've got a question from Bo, who says, how do you recommend managing audience participation, workshops? So
things like Zoom, you know, the rooms option I think I would use. So get everybody together to start with, exactly as you'd run it. It's just tech. I think it is different. There's a cultural aspect that you have to take people on a journey, but the tech has been set up in a way that it does enable you to run workshops in a way that we have before. There's also lots of really interesting workshop tools that you can use in terms of scribing and capturing information. Again, we've got this brilliant tech team. I could get them to share some insights and send it to Joe. But there's a rooms function on Zoom, for example, where you can send, Joe uses this for his conversation sessions, where you can send people off in little groups and they can have conversations and then come back and share with the group what they were thinking. In terms of bigger sessions, things like this, I mean, you would in a face-to-face environment, you wouldn't allow people to just keep chipping in all the way through. So I think it's, again, we're replicating as if someone was on a stage doing a talk. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure it does actually. Bo, does that answer the question?
I don't know. We'll see if they come in, but I reckon.
If it doesn't, to pitch in and tell me, and I can always come back to it after this if you want to know anything else.
Absolutely. I think there's that that piece which you've alluded to, you know, the almost the cultural element of it. You know, people are getting used to speaking over each other and management. And you spoke about in the talk as well, sort of muting people as they went.
Yeah.
And even, you know, to sort of reflect on what this talk, you know, when you were speaking, I muted myself, but then there was like funny bits where I was like laughing when you'd muted and stuff like that. So you know, there are all these sort of subtle layers of things which, I think we're just all learning about.
Exactly. And I think the key thing is it's just a means of us working. The great thing at the moment is that we're all doing it. So when it will get really challenging is when we want to run workshops that are internal, and there's a bunch of us at home and there's a bunch of us in the office, and the bunch of us at home are often forgotten. We're on video and we're not in the room and people don't remember that we're there. That's going to be a really interesting transition culturally.
Absolutely. And actually that's Maria's question. Would you still continue doing webinars here and there when we start going back to the new normal?
Without doubt. Yeah, without question. And actually what I've already started planning is, what this means is that I can save my budget for really high end face-to-face events, and I can make them very experiential, so that, you know, if people are going to commit that amount of time, then I want it to feel really special. But this has shown me that actually we can hit people really quickly with subjects that are topical, and we're not having to wait 8 weeks because we need to get dates in people's diaries. So yeah, without doubt, we'll continue to do webinars moving forwards. And I'm so delighted after trying to do them for probably 5 or 6 years.
It's funny. It would be really interesting to see. The funniest thing I found about this experience is that, so what, there was about 135 people in the room at peak, and now there's 106. If there was 106 people in a room, you'd need a really, really big room.
Yeah, I mean, how do you budget for those things? It's really, really hard. Another one, just really quickly, I run a Brilliant Women Network, which is, and I know I said about C-suites, but this is very much a C-suite conversation. And it enables women who are business leaders to get together and just share their thoughts. And it's not talking about tights and women's issues. It's very much, what are the differences as a female leader? And we usually do those as face-to-face breakfasts. Once a quarter. We've done bring your own breakfast every 2 weeks since the middle of March. We would never have done that before. They're loving it because it's half an hour, cup of coffee before they start their day, and more people are being able to get involved because they don't have to travel into London.
100%, and they can wear their gym shorts underneath their
or their flip-flops.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kat says, and this could probably be quite a short answer, I imagine, how many engagement tools such as polls, surveys, etc. would you recommend?
One or two tops. I've done one. I would usually do one poll, possibly two, if I had a lot of info I wanted to gather. And I have started doing feedback, a quick feedback form at the end, just to say, you know, what did you think? Would you like to sign up to the series? But yeah, no more than that. It is actually a bit intrusive because it pops up on your screen, it diverts your attention. You're having to think about what you're reading rather than what you're listening to.
That's it. There was a question I saw somewhere which asked about feedback tools. So there is, in fact, on the Zoom thing after this session, you get an automatic link to feedback survey. So we use Lido, but what do you use for feedback afterwards?
So we don't ask clients
I
for
do not.
feedback. We allow the account teams to do that because of the people we have. We want them to go and speak to their customer and say, how did you find it? But we give them, the things that we want to measure, and they do it in a sort of more informal way. But we do use survey tools. We've used SurveyMonkey in the past, but we've moved to a new one this last week. I can't remember what, Survey Gizmo, I think we've moved to.
Okay, that's a lot of them. I'm probably crucified here, but they're much of a muchness.
They are. And a lot of them are free if you only ask up to 10 questions. So it's worth looking at those options.
Absolutely. So do you find a question from Emma, another Emma, and another lovely human being?
Hello, Emma.
Says, do you find time and day matter on attendance? And do you have evidence/experience to support this? And has this changed since COVID?
Yeah, so time and day, yes. From face-to-face perspective, I would measure that really quite rigidly, and I would only ever do events Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. I would try and do breakfasts rather than post work, because the minute someone gets into the office, they are at risk of being pulled in all directions, and having to leave the office, go to a location, and then think about traveling home is much harder than coming into London, going to a location, and then going to the office. So time and day certainly matter face to face. In terms of evidence, we've tried a couple of different time slots. We tried lunchtime. A lot of our customers are managing kids at home at the moment. Lunchtime does not work. They really struggle. That's their time to be family. So we typically do 10 o'clock, and that seems to be good. People can come in, get their day started, take an hour out. 2 o'clock's are similar. You've had a lunch break, you've come back. Lunch break, who am I kidding? So you've had an opportunity to have a break. So we are doing some analysis, but I don't think I've got enough data yet in this situation to say when the webinars are most successful, other than the fact we're doing them at a similar time and our stats are remaining very static is probably a good indicator.
Absolutely. I feel like this next question is one of the big ones. So maybe we've got like 3 minutes left. So perhaps we focus on this. And once again, The Rock has chimed in, and it gets funnier every time I say it.
We love Zoom.
Just freaking love Zoom. So would you recommend Zoom as a platform? And I'm going to change the question here, because they said, did you do your research before you hosted? They obviously don't know who they're speaking to. But why did you choose Zoom, and what, if we're going to get really geeky, what are the key features that you love from Zoom more than any other?
So actually, even though I did do the research, someone mentioned, I think there was a mention of budget. We talked about budget. In fact, you mentioned it earlier. We, like many organizations, are cutting costs drastically at the moment. And we're doing that because we want to save jobs. And we're not going to spend money unnecessarily when we've got people on furlough, because we want everybody to have a job to come back to. And marketing is obviously one of the first places that gets hit when you look to cut costs. We already had Zoom as a platform, not for webinars, within the business, and I was paying to use GoToWebinar. GoToWebinar as a user experience is much nicer, but in reality, Zoom is not that dissimilar. But my biggest gripe with Zoom is whoever designs it has no aesthetic eye whatsoever. And they hide features all over the shop. So, we had someone run a webinar, and I thought I'd briefed her really well. And I'd missed a really critical point, which was enable practice session. So enable practice session is not how it sounds. It's not a pre-webinar practice. It means that when you start the webinar, you are not in broadcast mode. It's just me and Joe having a chat, Joe showing me his shorts and me showing him my denim shirts. And we might have shirts on, but the reality is underneath we are in sunshine mode. So it gives you that time just to, have a quick chat with your with the people who are on board. We went live straight away with our CEO and one of the directors of Pets at Home. So we had to be upfront and say, hi, you've got us here. We're just having a little chat beforehand. But so Zoom's great, but it's worth getting some guidance on where all the features are hidden. Like some of the recording features, the audio transcript is hidden, buried away somewhere. It's trial and error. But I think do you know what? I think it serves a purpose. I think it does really well. I found it delivers everything I need it to, apart from beautiful emails. Likewise, I did a reasonable amount of research to start off with, and
we settled on Zoom not because it was beautiful, but because it just seems to do the job that it's supposed to do. It's stable. You get, it's the Ron Seal of you know, platforms. It just does what it says on the tin. So
exactly. So yeah, I think it's pretty good.
Absolutely. Right. So there's been a whole bunch of questions that come in, but I'm mindful of time, and we are speaking to someone who schedules their day by a minute at a time. So we need to just say a huge thank you to Emma. I think that's been really illuminating on both a strategic and a tactical level. So, you know, thank you very much. And you can see the comments starting to come in from people.
I really enjoyed it. I could talk for hours about this subject.
Me too. Maybe we'll record like a Joe Rogan-esque podcast, like 4 hours long or something.
Just have a chat about all the things we love and all the things that cause us frustration.
Absolutely.
Thank you to everyone who logged in. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And yeah, you'll see that the URL for the feedback survey will come up on the window straight afterwards. So please do take the time to fill that in. And also please do take the time to thank the sponsors. They've been wonderful, as I say. You've all been wonderful. Emma's been wonderful. It's a sunny day. Life's good in many ways. So thank you all so much. And now for the brutal Zoom goodbye. Take care, everyone.
All right, bye.